So, as you can see, the eWaste gaming PC is back on my bench, and that can only mean one thing. Actually, it could mean a few things, but today it means that I'm going to show you how to install Windows 11 24H2 on unsupported hardware. I'll show you how to do an upgrade as well as a fresh install. Stay tuned. So with every new build of Windows 11, we need to do another video on how to install it on unsupported hardware. Now, luckily in this situation, many of the old methods actually still work, but it's boring just doing the same video again. So each one of these videos, I like to come up with a new way to install Windows on unsupported hardware. So that's what we're going to be doing today. But first, I got to pay some bills. So check out today's sponsor. Is your copy of Windows 10 unactivated? Well, it doesn't have to be, because with today's sponsor, VIP SCD Key, you can get a valid Windows 10 license for under $20. Stop dealing with that stupid watermark on the desktop, the valid license for Windows 10. Also, with an activated copy of Windows 10, you can upgrade to Windows 11 for free. Just go to the link in the description below and pick up a valid Windows 10 license key. During checkout, use the code CYBERCPU for a 25% discount. Once you have your key, go to your activation settings in Windows 10 and click on the link that says Change Product Key. Enter the product key you just purchased and hit Activate. Now you don't have to deal with that stupid watermark that come with running an unactivated copy of Windows 10. Now, on with the video. So yes, many of the old methods for installing Windows 11 on unsupported hardware still work really well on 24H2. In fact, my favorite method of upgrading an unsupported system by just using the server installer still works just fine. If you're not familiar with that method, I'm going to cover it in this video. However, that method is only good for upgrading from a previous version of Windows, whether it be an older build of Windows 11 or Windows 10. So, if you want to do a fresh install, you have to make yourself an install USB that will install on unsupported hardware. Now, I think one of the best methods to do a fresh install of Windows 11 is through the Rufus method. However, the Rufus method doesn't work on 24H2. At least, it didn't work at the time of filming this video. I'm sure the developers of Rufus are going to figure this out. But in the meantime, for people who want to install Windows 11 on unsupported hardware, we need an alternative. But with that said, let me clarify this a bit. The Rufus method actually does work on 24H2, if you're doing a fresh install, that is. But it doesn't work for doing an upgrade like it did in the previous builds for Windows 11. However, it can be made to work with just a little bit of tweaking, and that's what we're going to be doing today, or at least that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. So the system that we're going to be doing this on today is my trusty eWaste gaming PC that we built back at the beginning of this channel. This is actually a pretty old computer. This essentially sits underneath my bench and only gets pulled out when I want to do videos on installing Windows 11 on unsupported hardware. Because when it comes to unsupported hardware, this computer is as unsupported in every way possible. This is an AMD FX 6300 with a triple core processor that has 6 logical cores. The processor is way off the Windows 11 supported processor list. We're also running 16 gigs of RAM because I don't actually hate myself. But you know, the system also fails the secure boot and the TPM 2.0 requirement. And also, I'm going to be doing this entire guide from Windows 10. In previous videos, I've shown how to upgrade from an earlier build of Windows 11 to a newer build, and I've gotten a few people confused on why I'm upgrading Windows 11 to Windows 11. So, for the sake of this video, we're going to be starting at Windows 10. However, you will still need to use these types of workarounds in order to upgrade to newer builds of Windows 11. So, with that said, I'm going to get this thing hooked up and we're going to install Windows 11 on it. Okay, so here we are in Windows 10. This here, let me go down to Windows settings here real quick and let me show you. If we go into System, then scroll down to About, as you can see, this is an AMD FX 6300 with 16 gigs of RAM. Now, I'm going to be doing this video from Windows 10 Home just to show that it works with both Home and Pro. And as you can see, we're on the 22H2 version of Windows 10. Now, you're going to need to use these same workarounds if you're upgrading from an older version of Windows 11. Like if you're on Windows 11 23H2, you're going to have to follow these same guides. I'm just doing this guide from Windows 10 right now because in the past, I've gotten complaints for doing this on a Windows 11 system. Some people don't realize that you have to use workarounds in order to go to the different build updates. However, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's go ahead and close this. And as you can see, I'm going to go ahead and open the PC Health Check app. And this app here will tell you whether or not your computer passes the system requirements for Windows 11. So if we check now, as you can see, we don't support Secure Boot. We don't support TPM 2.0, and this processor isn't supported on the list of supported processors for Windows 11. So this is definitely the worst case scenario when it comes to Windows 11 hardware requirements. So we're going to go ahead and close this. And the first step that we need to do is actually download Windows 11. So from that, we're going to go ahead and open up our browser. And from our browser, we're going to jump into Windows 11 here. And if you go to this website right here, this is Microsoft's regular download site for installing Windows. I'll leave a link to this in the description below, but they've already upgraded to the version 24H2. And to do this, what we want to do is scroll down and we want to get the ISO image here. And to download an ISO image, go ahead and select the edition you want, which there's only one, the Windows 11. Go ahead and hit download now. And it's going to take a second to validate your request, and it's going to ask you what your language is. And we're going to go ahead and pick English United States, but you pick whatever language you want to pick. This should work with any language that you choose. Go ahead and hit confirm, and then it has to validate your request again. And from that point, you're going to go ahead and click this button to start downloading it. Now, it's a pretty big download. It's over 5 gigabytes, and luckily, I already have it downloaded, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel this real quick. And once it finishes downloading, you should be able to find it inside of your downloads folder. As you can see, I have mine right here. Now, the next thing that we want to download, go ahead and just leave this sitting in your download folder for right now. The next thing that we're going to need is a copy of Rufus. Now, I did say that the Rufus method doesn't work, and that's true. However, we're still going to be using the Rufus method. We're just going to be using it in a different way. So we're going to scroll down and download the latest copy of Rufus. I like to use the portable version, but if you want to use the full install version, you can if you want. I'm going to go ahead and download the portable right now. And it looks as if Rufus has an awful lot of ads going down here. All right, so once it's finished, we're going to go ahead and open up our downloads folder just to verify it's there. And it is. We can go ahead and close that now. And then from this point, there's one more thing that we need to download. We actually need a copy of Windows 11 23H2. And I'll tell you why we're going to need this in a minute. But to get that, we're going to go ahead and use this script right here called the MediaCreationTool.bat. And now this is a script that I actually did an entire video on a while back. It's a great script if you want to download older versions of Windows ISO files. It works really well. So go ahead and click on the code button right here, and you want to download the zip file. So once you do that, we're going to go ahead and open our download folder, and you can see everything that we have is right here ready to go. And I'll go ahead and leave links in the descriptions for all of these things so that you can find them when you go to do this yourself. So we're going to go ahead and close Chrome. We're done with that now. And we want to extract the MediaCreationTool.bat real quick. So we're going to go ahead and extract that. Once it opens up, we're going to go ahead and open this, and we want to run this script right here. Now, I recommend running this script at the very beginning as administrator. If you don't, you're going to get through the entire script, and then it's going to ask you for administrator permissions, and you'll have to go through it again. So you might as well just start it as administrator from the very beginning. And once it opens, it's going to open up this little GUI right here that has every version of Windows 10 and 11 going all the way back to 1507. Now, what we want is the 23H2. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. We're going to click Auto ISO. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to open the Media Creation tool from Microsoft and create an ISO for us for the Windows 11 23H2. Essentially, all this script is it's a way to manipulate the Media Creation tool to download different versions of Windows for us. So in this case, it's going to go ahead and download the ISO that we want for 23H2, and then we can move on with the process. So for the next step, we are obviously going to need a USB thumb drive because we're going to be creating an install USB with 24H2 that we can use to both upgrade the system as well as do fresh installs with. Now, the reason why we're downloading 23H2 might seem a little counterintuitive, but you'll understand why we're doing it in a minute. So it's going to take a second for this ISO to finish, and once it's done, I'll meet you back on the system. Okay, and once the script finishes, you'll get this screen right here that says done. Press any key to exit. We do that and it'll exit out. And as you can see, we now have our ISO image for 23H2. So go ahead and take this and just drag it up and drop it on your desktop. And you can go ahead and close the MediaCreationTool.bat. We won't need it anymore at this point. Now, what we're going to need to do at this point though, is open up Rufus. And then for Rufus, go ahead and give it administrator permissions, and then it's going to ask you at the beginning if you want the application to be able to check for updates. I would go ahead and hit yes. There's a few features within Rufus that won't work unless you do that, but they're not features that we're going to need in this video anyway. But it is a good practice to go ahead and hit yes and allow it to do that. So the first thing we want to do, obviously, is stick our USB drive into the computer. And once we stick it in, it'll probably autoplay, and it did. And as you can see, it is a Windows setup because obviously I've done this process a few times just to make sure it works for you guys. But the first thing that we want to do once our USB is installed in is make sure that the USB selected is the one that you want to nuke, because in this case, it's going to destroy everything on the drive. Now, I'm using a 64 gig USB drive because it's the only one I had available at the time of making this video. But you need a minimum of an 8 gig USB drive in order to do this process. So go ahead and pick yourself up at least an 8 gig USB drive. Now, what we're going to want to do is we want to go ahead and hit the select button here, and we want to select the 23H2 consumer, the ISO that we created with the MediaCreationTool.bat. Now, I understand that we're going to be installing 24H2, but for right now, we're going to actually create a Rufus drive with a 23H2 ISO. And it's really important that you use the 23H2, or you can probably use the 22H2 as well, but you might as well use the 23 because that's the one that I've tested. So go ahead and select that and hit open, and it's going to go through and it's going to set all of the default settings that it would normally use for 23H2. Now, we need to change a few of these, and some of these are extremely important. Like for instance, the partition scheme. If you're installing this on a computer that is using unsupported hardware, you probably don't have a GPT partition scheme for UEFI. So you're going to have to change this to MBR. Now, this is extremely important. If you don't do this, it won't work. Trust me. I tested it. It won't work. But once you change that setting, you should be able to boot it in BIOS mode, even on UEFI systems. However, just keep in mind that this is only going to work to install an MBR version of Windows 11. So if you end up using this USB drive later on a system that isn't unsupported hardware, then that could cause problems for you down the line. So just keep that in mind. So once we're finished with that, we're going to go ahead and hit the start button right here. And it's going to ask us for our regular customized Windows installation selections. And this is really important too. You want to make sure to have checked the remove requirement for 4 gig RAM, Secure Boot, and TPM 2.0. This is what actually allows us to install Windows 11 on unsupported hardware. And then also you can remove the requirement for an online Microsoft account. However, unfortunately, this isn't going to work anyway. And once you are done with the ISO, I'll explain why, and I'll tell you how to get around that anyway. And then you could select some of these other ones if you wanted to, but some of these are going to be less meaningful in this certain circumstance because 24H2 has heavily changed the installer for Windows, and a lot of these aren't going to work. So just make sure that you have at least the first one checked, and then go ahead and hit OK. And at this point, go ahead and hit OK again. It's just warning you that it's going to destroy everything that's on the drive. And then, unfortunately, you're going to have to sit around and wait for a little bit because it takes Rufus quite a bit of time to create this USB. Now, you might have figured out by now why we're using 23H2 in order to create a USB installer. Obviously, we don't want to install 23H2. We want to install 24H2. Unfortunately, though, the 24H2 installer has been patched to not function with our previous workarounds. So the easiest way to get around this is to simply use the installer for 23H2. Once this USB is created, we'll go in and modify the USB with the 24H2 WIM file. So let's give Rufus a minute to finish, and I'll meet you back in Windows, and I'll show you what to do next. Okay, so here we go. Rufus just finished. Once Rufus finishes, go ahead and just hit the close button, and we're done with Rufus now. And the next thing that we need to do is now we need to concentrate on our 24H2 ISO. This is where this comes in handy. So all you have to do is just double click on it, go ahead and hit open, and it will mount the 24H2 ISO into a virtual DVD drive. And as you can see, here's all the files for the ISO right here. So the next thing that we're going to need, obviously, is we're going to have another window open, and we're going to go ahead and do that. So we're going to go ahead and get 2 Explorer windows open here. One of them is going to be our 24H2 ISO. The other one is going to be the USB that we just created. So go ahead and open that up and then go into the sources folder. And then what I like to do is I like to organize it by size. It just kind of makes it a little bit easier to find the files that we're looking for. So go ahead and click size right here in order to organize it with the biggest size first. And that file is going to be the install ESD right here. And you'll know you're working with the 23H2 ISO because you'll see it right here in the name of the USB drive. It says 23H2. So go ahead and right click on that one and just hit delete. And what this is actually the operating system. This is all the install files for the operating system. And once that's deleted, we're going to go over to our 24H2 ISO. We're going to go into sources here, and same thing, just go ahead and organize it. This is probably the way it's going to look when you first open it. Just go ahead and click on size once, and that'll organize it by size. And then we want the installed WIM from the ISO image that we downloaded from Microsoft. And at this point, all you got to do is grab it, drag it over, and drop it into our USB drive. And it's going to take a second for it to copy over because it is a pretty big file. But once it copies over, we should be able to use this drive to install Windows 11 on unsupported hardware. All right, now that you have this USB created, you can use this on unsupported hardware to either do a fresh install of Windows 11 or upgrade a system from a previous build. But now that we've created this USB drive, let me show you a way to upgrade a previous build of Windows with just one command. It's pretty easy. All right, so I'm going to start this out by going back to this PC and unmounting this drive, even though we're going to need it mounted in a minute anyway. So if you have a system that already has Windows 11, or if you want to upgrade from Windows 10 and you're not interested in a fresh install, you want to keep all of your settings and data and you just want to upgrade to Windows 11, there's a really easy way to do it. So if you go into your downloads folder, you're going to look for the 24H2 ISO that you downloaded from Microsoft. Go ahead and double click it to mount it just like we did before, and this mounts the ISO into a virtual CD-ROM. And what we're going to want to do is go back to this PC and we want to look at what drive letter that it's mounted to. On this one, you can see the drive letter is D. So what we want to do now is go ahead and click the start button and type CMD, and that's going to open up our command prompt. Now, you don't need administrator access or nothing like that. You just need to open up a command prompt. And what you want to do is go to your D drive, and this is the drive that we had open before that has our virtual DVD mounted on it. And what we're interested in is right here, the setup.exe file. And we want to run this with an argument that allows it to use a different installer. So go down to your command prompt and just type in setup.exe, then space, then you want to do /product space, and then we want to type server. And then go ahead and hit enter. And what this is going to do is go ahead and hit yes to the user account control, and it's going to launch Windows Setup. But you're going to notice one thing slightly different about Windows Setup. And once the setup appears, you can go ahead and close all these windows you have open. You don't need them open anymore. So you'll notice right when you start off, it says install Windows Server. Now, it's not actually installing Windows Server. It's just using the server installer that comes built in Windows. Because, you know, Microsoft writes one program and uses it for essentially their entire line. So what we're doing is we're telling it to use the server installer. However, it's still only going to install what's in the ESD or the WIM file, and that's the file that is in the sources folder that we messed with earlier. So all we want to do is we want to go ahead and click the next button here, and it's going to go through and check for updates like it typically does through the install process. And you're going to have to give it a second to do that, and I'll go ahead and skip to once this is finished. Okay, so now we're back to our regular screen here again, and you'll see that it's asking us for if we agree with the license terms. Just go ahead and hit yes. And then it says keep file settings and app, and click next. And then it's going through and making sure it's ready to install. And it does a few checks before it starts the install process. And it checks for updates again, because it's not like it didn't just check for updates like 3 seconds ago, but I guess it needs to do it again, doesn't it? So I'm going to skip ahead until this check for updates is finished too, and we can continue on with the install process. Okay, so once it checks for updates, it leaves us at this screen right here where it tells us it's going to install Windows 11 and it's going to keep files, settings, and apps. So as soon as you push install, it should start the install process. Now, it still says it's installing Windows Server, but don't worry, it's not installing Windows Server. It is going to be Windows 11 Home, as you saw with the last screen. It just thinks it's installing Server, and that's why we're able to bypass the hardware requirements. Now, the reason why I saved the easy method for last is because I don't have a lot of confidence that it's going to continue to work. You see, there was reports all the way back in 24H2 beta that Microsoft had disabled this workaround. But lo and behold, when I tried it, it worked fine. So, as of the filming of this video, using the server installer to install 24H2 on unsupported hardware works fine. That doesn't mean it's going to continue to work into the future, but we might as well take advantage of it while we can, right? Personally, I think Microsoft is a lot less strict on their hardware requirements than they'd like to lead us to believe they are. But if at any point this method stops working, then the video is at least still useful because the first method should work no matter what. I don't see any way of that one getting patched out. Now, during this install though, you're going to see the label Windows Server all over everything. But don't panic, you're not actually installing Windows Server. The way this workaround works is that it uses the server installer to install the standard 24H2. So even though it says Server, it will be either Home or Pro based on what your current version of Windows is. So it's going to take a second for this install, but once it does, I will meet you back in Windows 11. Okay, here we are in Windows 11, and we're going to go ahead and jump into settings real quick here, and then we're going to go into System. We're going to scroll down to About, just so that we can verify we are in fact on 24H2. It's still Windows 11 Home Edition, and as you can see, we're running this on an AMD FX 6300. So there you go. It's entirely possible to run Windows 11 24H2 on unsupported hardware. In this case, really unsupported hardware. In fact, the time that I've spent on this system here preparing for this video, I can say that 24H2 actually runs better than 23H2 did. In fact, when 23H2 came out, I said that it was probably getting close to time to start looking at upgrading your hardware if you're still running unsupported hardware. But I gotta say, Microsoft did a great job of making 24H2 run snappier on a low-spec system. Also, I did a little bit of testing within Windows 11 to confirm a few things. If you happen to have watched my last video, I showed you how to do a repair install on Windows 11. Unfortunately, though, that does not work on unsupported hardware. I had a feeling in the last video that it wouldn't work, and I believe I even mentioned that. So if you do want to do a repair install on unsupported hardware, you would have to do an in-place upgrade using a modified installer like we did at the beginning of this video. Or you might actually be able to use the server method too. We'll have to see how that works out. Also, I get this question every single time I do one of these videos. People ask me if they can still get security updates. The answer to that question is yes, of course. Microsoft threatened to not allow unsupported hardware to get security updates in Windows 11, but they have never followed through on that threat. In fact, if in every single build of Windows 11, security updates on unsupported hardware work just fine. However, you can't do build updates if you're on unsupported hardware. And that's why I do videos like this every time a new build comes out. And finally, if you're doing a fresh install of Windows 11 24H2, the settings in Rufus to disable the Microsoft account requirement doesn't work, even if you create a USB drive with the instructions that I gave you at the beginning of the video. However, my last video on how to bypass the Microsoft account requirements still works perfectly fine. And if you'd like to check out that video, then click right here. Luckily, you can still use the bypass NRO workaround, but it's a little bit different than it was before. I show you how to do it in that video there. And as always, you guys have a great day.